Penguin Random House Audio presents A Sweet Sting of Salt, a novel, by Rose Sutherland. Read for you by Aven. To anyone who has ever been lonely, keep searching. Your people are out there. Prologue, June 1813. The ship was burning. The men at the shipyard stopped their work to point and shout. People came out from the little wooden buildings along the shore of Barker's Bay, lining up at the water's edge to stare, chattering with ever wilder theories as a thin white line of smoke stretched up and up, vanishing into the pale sky. The schooner had only just appeared in the water out past the point. At that size it was a privateer, and therefore American, and therefore of interest, although everyone agreed the war was very nearly over and might have been months ago, for all the more it had touched them in the village. 4-year-old Jean, unlike the others on the shore, spied something nearer to hand and of much greater interest to her than a speck of a ship and a wavering line. She tugged at her father's sleeve. Normally he was quick to respond, seldom brushing her aside as most adults did a child her age, but caught up in the drama on the water, he waved her off. Mr. Schnare, the shipbuilder, was speaking with her dad in a hushed voice.
"Not one of mine. I'd know it by sight. But I hear they've been chasing that young teaser a week past, clear down Lunenburg way and back."
So Jean returned her gaze to the pair of harbor seals that had surfaced not 20 feet from shore and caught her eye. They were sleek and plump, silver-gray and speckled, and paler underneath when the little one rolled, showing its belly. They bobbed where the river current bumped up against the bay, making an eddy and a deep pool, where a stick thrown in might start floating out to sea but slowly loop back to you again, the water circling back toward the shore. Jean's father had showed her the trick of it, a thing that only worked when the tide was up. Climbing onto one of the sturdy blue rocks of the breakwater, Jean threw a quick glance back over her shoulder to be certain she was not about to earn herself a tongue-lashing. A British warship had rounded the point, closing in on the schooner. It was drifting now. Her father was still talking to Mr. Schnare, and no one else had any attention to spare for her. Jean had no attention to spare for anything that was not seal-shaped. The little seal was looking, really looking at her with big dark eyes. It was coming closer, drifting, letting the circle current pull it along. Jean crawled out farther on her rock. The seal's damp black nose sniffed at the salty air, a spark of light glittering in a drop of water on one of its whiskers. The whisker twitched, and the droplet flew off. Jean giggled. The seal blinked slowly, like a cat, then made a soft huff and pointed its nose toward her, drawing closer still. It had to be a girl. It was so soft and pretty. Jean leaned forward, stretching a hand out over the water and wiggling her fingers, coaxing, willing it to come right to her. The seal's spotted coat was velvet rich-looking, and Jean had never wanted anything so badly as she wanted to stroke it, even just once. It had the most marvelous eyes, too, fringed with long, curling lashes, dark and gleaming as a mystery, or the water in the deep bottom of a well. It was so close. Another foot, and the seal would be near enough to touch, and Jean leaned out even more, stretching as far as she could, small fingers reaching. The burning ship exploded, a flash of light and sound. The larger seal gave a sharp yelp, as if someone had made a cruel throw and hit it with a rock. The little seal started and dove. Jean overbalanced, the shivering reflection of her face and rusty hair rushing up at her. A yell, and a hand closed hard on the back of her dress, yanking her upright with a jerk, taking her breath away. In half an instant, Jean was up in her father's arms, carried as if she were still a little baby.
"A great girl your age, and still you can't mind? Can I not trust you even one moment while I talk? How many times must I tell you to keep away from the water on your own?"
But she was not minding him even now, though her father did not realize it, his voice coming to her as if from a great distance or in a dream.
Schnare, wait on me. I'll drop Jean up the mill to play with the kiddies girls, and we'll put out together."
As he strode away from the shore, men scrambled into their boats to go do whatever there was to be done, to see if any soul was left to save in the deep water off the point. A thing that once was a ship settled there, black and burning against a thin pink evening sky. Jean stared back over her father's shoulder until they passed over the river bridge and the buildings blocked her view, but no sleek, cunning heads reappeared in the bay. The seals were gone. Chapter 1. November 1832. The ship was burning. Sorry? Jean looked up from drying her hands on a worn tea towel, frowning at the non sequitur. Last night, the ship was burning. Ida May Eisner waved toward the window over the table in her kitchen as she sat herself up on the sofa. The moon was full. Everyone says the ghost ship burns in the bay on full moon nights. Did you see it, out where you are? Oh, sure. Jean closed the lid of her basket, solid and real. Had the captain in for tea, too, don't you know? She rolled her eyes as she spoke, teasing. Jean Langell. Ida leveled her pinky and pointer fingers at Jean, warning off the evil eye. You oughtn't say such things. You'll have the devil at your door. With that, she stood, shook her skirts back into place, and went to poke a finger into her dough, testing to see if it had risen enough to go in the oven. When it was done baking, Ida would run a knife round the finished loaf and lift it out, rather than turning over the pan and risk turning a ship over with it. That was the superstition among the German families. The British had brought the Germans to the South Shore, fresh out of people of their own to settle the colony with, or at least any willing to pay for the dubious privilege of a perilous trip in exchange for hard work and an uncertain reward. England had gone recruiting and come up with a few boatloads of Germans, some French like Jean's father's people, and even a handful of reluctant Swiss. Farmers all, they were set down on a land so full of trees and rocks that they were forced into working the seas and the forests instead. Only their mingled superstitions took root, and those had twined around one another until it was hard to say where one story left off and the next began, which were fanciful and which were true. If something followed you through the wood to the stream, you didn't know whose boat it had got off of, nor did you care, and you didn't slow your steps to ask if it was something older still, one of the things the natives talked more around than about. The young teaser might not have made port on its final voyage, but it had found firm anchor among all the other tales in the 20 years since its demise, said to round the point tipped in silver flame on clear, full-moon nights, only to vanish as sirens and selkies and mermaids did. It was a pretty and romantic notion, the ghost ship, and harmless, as so many pretty, romantic notions were not. As the village midwife, Jean had seen where romantic notions got you, and considered the newly minted Mrs. Eisner fairly solid evidence of it. A handsome enough lass of 17, Ida May Mosier had first found herself caught in the family way, and then found herself married within days of the thing being known. The young man involved, Richie, was a pig farmer's son with a good head of hair and a ready laugh, who'd kissed her breathless after a dance at the hall. The pair of them had certainly had a romantic time, stolen away in a hayloft during a summer thunderstorm. But now it was November, and the 3 weeks' bride was starting to be swollen and sore-footed and not entirely happy with her pig farmer's son, who hadn't brought much more to their union than good sausage. No, Jean wasn't much for romantic notions herself, not like Ida May. Not anymore, for all that some might expect it of a young woman, living all to herself out along a wild stretch of the Nova Scotian coast. Certainly no one had made any effort at trying to court Jean, not since she was 19. Not unless she considered the fellow who'd cornered her once and said he'd show her what was what and set her right as courting her. She'd caught him in the soft parts with her knee, and she was fairly sure Laurie had had some words with him too, later, when he was in off the ships. Well, words by way of knocking several of the man's teeth loose, and him off the end of the wharf. Laurie Ernst was the younger of her men.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?